The wild geese flew across the sea and past a village with a large lake behind it. This was once a paradise for migratory birds, with lush reeds blowing in the wind, green water plants swaying at the bottom of the lake, and various birds flapping their wings and chasing each other on the blue lake. As soon as Oscar landed on the lake, a group of birds swam over and said dejectedly, "Oscar, welcome, but maybe we won't see you next time." Oscar asked doubtfully, "What happened?" The bird said sadly, "The people in the village are going to fill up this beautiful lake, and we are going to lose it." Oscar also became worried. "This is really regrettable. We can't stop humans from destroying this beautiful lake." Everyone felt sad after hearing this. Neil liked this lake very much. He ran around catching tadpoles and floating in the water. He picked up an empty bird's nest under a tree. Neil pushed it into the lake and jumped in. The bird's nest was like a boat, being blown forward slowly by the wind. The boat rode through the reeds and heard a quacking sound. A beautiful mallard looked at Neil nervously. Neil smiled and said, "I am a friend of the wild geese. My name is Neil. We just passed by here." The mallard replied politely, "Welcome. My name is Gallow." Neil looked at this mallard. Its neck and head were covered with green feathers, and its yellow beak glowed in the sunlight. But why was there a rope around his neck? Neil became curious. At this time, a group of wild ducks flew over their heads. Gallow shouted to his friends in a panic, "It's dangerous here. Leave quickly." The wild ducks flew away in a hurry. Then, a man suddenly emerged from the grass on the shore. He held a shotgun and said dissatisfiedly, "I'm really unlucky today, and the wild ducks escaped again." After saying that, he pulled the rope around Gallow's neck and went ashore. Gallow didn't struggle. He lowered his head, his eyes filled with sadness. Neil feels sorry for Gallow and decides to find out what happened. So Neil secretly followed them into the man's home. Gallow was lying on the floor, and next to him was a big old dog, with its thin body curled up, its long ears hanging down, and its eyes narrowed, sleeping. "Gallow, what happened? Why aren't you with your friends?" Nils asked with concern. Gallow looked up at Nils and said sadly, "Once, I was accidentally injured by this man with a gun. His child, Paul, and his wife took good care of me, and I slowly got better. But from then on, a rope was tied around my neck. Later, the male owner tied me up and put me in the reeds. When my friends flew over, I shouted to them excitedly. Suddenly, there was a gunshot, and a wild duck fell into the lake. At this time, I only heard the male owner laughing and walking out of the grass triumphantly, taking my dead friend and me back home. It's all my fault. My friend was killed." As he spoke, Gallow lowered his head and began to cry. Neil said angrily, "Your master is so abominable. Gallow, don't be sad. You should leave here and live a free life." At this time, the big dog suddenly opened his eyes and said, "Gallow lives here? It's been a long time, and Paul and I will be reluctant to let him go." Neil was so frightened that he hurriedly shrank behind Gallow. Gallow said, "Don't be afraid. The big dog is my good friend." The door opened with a creak, and the big dog turned over and blocked Nils. Nils slipped out of the room while no one was paying attention. He decided to save Gallow. On this day, Gallow was tied to the lake again, and Neil quietly came to Gallow's side while paddling the bird's nest. He hid in the thick reeds and said to Gallow, who was floating on the water, "Gallow, I'm here to save you. I will cut the rope, and you can escape." Gallow nodded. Nils saw the man lurking in the grass with a gun through the reeds, so he quickly crawled to Gallow, took out his knife, and began to cut the rope vigorously. Nils was so tired that he was sweating profusely, and his hands were almost numb. At this time, the man seemed to have discovered something and walked over along the grass on the shore. Gallow screamed when he saw the man coming this way. The man immediately grabbed the rope. Nils cut it hard several times with the knife, and finally the rope was cut. He shouted eagerly, "Run away! Run away!" Gallow flapped his wings and finally got rid of the rope and flew up. After Gallow flew away, the little boy Paul missed him very much. He often cried and asked his parents for Gallow. Mom comforted Paul and said, "Good boy, Gallow is homesick too. He wants to be with his parents, just like you are with us." One day, Paul and the big dog went to the lake to play together. The big dog lay on the stone to bask in the sun and soon fell asleep. He shook the big dog's ears, but the big dog didn't respond. At this time, Paul saw a small boat on the shore, so he jumped on it and played. The boat slowly drifted along the current to the center of the lake. Gallow was flying over the lake with his friends. At this time, he saw Paul sitting in a small boat and calling for help in panic. There was a hole in the boat, and water slowly poured in, almost covering Paul's knees. Gallow hurriedly flew to the big dog, pecked his ears with his mouth, and shouted, "Wake up, Paul is in danger." When the big dog woke up, Gallow flew to find Nils and Oscar. The big dog shook his head, opened his eyes, and saw Paul calling for help as the boat drifted further and further away. The big dog started barking anxiously along the shore. Paul's parents heard the barking of the big dog. They rushed to the shore and found that Paul was drifting further and further away on an old boat. Paul's mother cried in fear. Paul's father hurried to the village to find help. At the same time, the wild geese and Gallow arrived at the center of the lake. They surrounded the boat and slowly pushed it towards a small island not far away. Paul finally reached the island safely. At this time, Oscar ordered, "Everyone shout together so that Paul's parents can find this place." So everyone shouted towards the riverbank together. Paul's mother and the villagers were waiting anxiously on the shore. Paul's father was rowing on the lake. They heard the calls of wild geese in front of them, so they quickly rowed towards the center of the lake. Soon Paul's father and the villagers arrived at the island. They were shocked when they saw the scene in front of them. A group of wild geese were surrounding Paul. There was both fear and expectation in their eyes. Paul had his arms around Gallow's neck and looked very happy. Paul's father realized that it was these kind-hearted wild geese that had saved his son. Thinking that he had shot these wild geese before, he felt ashamed and said to the villagers, "Thanks to these wild geese for saving my child. Maybe we should keep this lake and let them live here." The villagers all agreed. They decided to preserve the lake and ban the hunting of the birds that live here. Gallow and the wild geese are very happy. They finally don't have to worry about losing their home. Nils also learned that helping others means helping yourself. After a day of rest, the wild geese said goodbye to their new friend Gallow, and they will embark on a new journey.